Hello, folks. Today is Wednesday, May 16th. Um, this is the KubeADM office hours meeting. If folks have a chance, I put a link to the agenda in chat if you could add your deets and any topics you want to discuss there. Right off the bat, we have the one we were talking about yesterday. Lucas, if you wanted to start us off with a discussion around the kubelet config.
Yeah, sure. So I wrote a pretty long doc in the end, or it's in an issue right now. I will convert it into a cap later on the integration between kubeADM and kubelet that we hope to improve. Is there any specific, should I go through the flow or?
I think for the edification of others, like I read your PR and I already know what most of the init workflow is. I have a lot of comments about upgrades, but we'll save that till the end. So if you want to give people the TLDR of the details, I think that would probably be useful for sort of educating those who've not known the path of this stuff. So.
Okay. So currently, currently we don't have an interface between the kubeADM and the kubelet. So kubeADM can't tell kubelet what to do at all. And this is a challenge because, for example, we set things like the service subnet in Kubernetes. If we change that in kubeADM at kubeADM init time, it's going to break all kubelet's DNS resolving. So then you have to go and SSH into every single node and create some custom drop-in file, which is really tedious and error-prone. And then first your DNS resolution works. So getting this cluster-level configuration flow down, making that information flow down to the kubelets is something we wanted to do in a long time. I remember discussions in Austin, or Seattle 2016 something, when we thought this is something we have to do, and here we are. Hopefully this is the first chance we have to actually execute on it, thanks to the great work that Mike Dolphin has done with the kubelet. So now we have versioned, and CLI flags are bad for a lot of reasons. The first thing is there's no, we have only one API, and that's what's defined there. We can't do any conversions when things change. So instead we have to do this 6-month deprecation cycle and change every deployment that has ever enabled this flag. And yeah, changing defaults is also really tedious. But with the component configuration of the kubelet, we can do things like conversions between versions easily. It's actually automatically handled by the API machinery and things like that. So the proposal to execute on in time for 1.11 is to make kubeADM write a config file for the kubelet. So inside of the kubeADM API, we'll embed the whole struct of the kubelet component configuration. So you can do kubeADM init --config, and inside of that config you have what configuration for how the kubelets in the cluster should be configured. kubeADM will then do the normal init flow. The first thing it does in the pre-flight check is to execute systemctl start kubelet if it's not already running. It then reads config and uses it internally, kubeADM, that is. Then kubeADM will, in this case, enforce a few security-related options for the kubelet config. For example, securing, yeah.
So the first question I had, because we've never crossed this line before of kubeADM calling systemd directly. And right now we're still...
yeah, that has been from version 1. That is not new. I just repeated it. That has been since kubeADM 0.
but the question I have is right now the debs and the RPMs, they bundle in a default systemd unit file. And if we are controlling the initialization with kubeadm, does it make more sense for us to actually manage and own the unit file creation as part of kubeadm init?
So yeah, I could add a note what the relationship is there. Right now we have one kubelet deb, which is generic, doesn't specify any args. And then we have one kubeadm deb that has a drop-in file for the kubelet. And as it stands, we manage, so let's say we have kubeadm 110, then we have configuration for the kubelet 110 as well. But when we're doing upgrades, this is like a chicken and egg, as Jason has said. And hence we're working it around in various ways. But with this solution, we will have one static kubeadm drop-in for the kubelet. It won't change between minor versions, as it have done all times so far.
It could, but the question I have is like, are we going to start managing that, or are we going to put that into the debs and RPM still?
What?
The drop-in file, the kubeadm, so the systemd unit file that's an override. Like we've never managed that in the past, but there's nothing to say if we're going to do initialization. There's nothing that prevents us from actually managing that and dropping that file as part of init.
I don't think we should do that because it's I don't see any benefit with. So I mean, again, we only have one. You only have to specify with this new flow. You only have to specify 3 parameters: config, kubeconfig, bootstrap kubeconfig. That's all. And as long as we just say you should have a running kubelet with these 3 pointers to files, it's okay.
I don't think that's necessarily true, though, because there are still some options for the kubelet that we may need to set in kubeadm that aren't available in the kubelet config.
Like what?
Such as, updating C groups. We could do that on the fly based on detection of what the CRI is using. We could do detection for some of the other stuff as well that is only available as command line flags, but not available in the actual kubelet config.
So you want to do systemd versus the C group FS? Is that even a thing for most people anymore?
It is. So like I ran into this the other day because I installed Docker CE on a CentOS system, and Docker CE shipped with C group FS as the default C group manager, and the packaging that we have for kubeadm automatically puts down systemd for RPM-based systems.
So yeah, I mean, I really want to distinguish what we do in kubeadm in the debs. For example, what we're going to do in the debs still is things like setting the C group flag. Yes, we have to do that, otherwise any RPM system won't work. And like the other example is systemd resolve D. That is also like one thing we have to configure there via a flag, but it doesn't. That is not so. Anything that is specifiable via a flag, basically still that is only a flag, is either deprecated or purely deprecated, experimental, or purely instance specific, like node IP or node hostname override.
So I think we still need to give ourselves the flexibility to be able to override those. And one of the things that there was a discussion on the PR, I really think that we need to move if we are going to manage a systemd configuration unit file or systemd drop-in, we really need to put that under user lib systemd, which is where generally package managed unit files and drop-ins go. And then we would still have the ability to override things that are set at the package level by modifying unit drop-in files under etc systemd within kubeadm.
I don't care strongly about etc versus usual lib, but yeah. So what this proposal is about is like the generic configuration, things like authorization, authentication, ports to enable, what DNS to use, stuff like that. That is cluster, so to say, cluster generic for all kubelets. Still, I want the debs to manage to have this static drop-in file for the kubelet from the kubeadm deb that sets kubeconfig, bootstrap kubeconfig, and config. And as you said, if we ever really have to change something in that, we can still do that. That's what we've been doing in all releases so far. But at least we're going to remove the churn of doing things every minor release that affects the normal authorization, authentication stuff. For example, the C advisor port command line flag is going to be removed in 1.12. And that means that if we do something wrong there, it's going to start crash looping if we have the wrong drop-in and stuff. With this new thing, we don't necessarily have to do such things.
I think what Jason's trying to say, and what the point I'm trying to make too, is that I agree that we should still have a default unit file, or what I'll just call it unit file for the time being, a default unit file that gets dropped in with the package. But one piece that we're missing and that we were talking about is the minutia of kubeadm init having the drop-in override capability as part of initialization to prevent a number of use cases that we actually have gotten coming in from issues, which include the C group override, which include NodeIP, which include the other apparatus. So that way, like if you do init, it sets the other flags that we can't do as part of the dynamic kubelet configuration parameters.
Okay, yeah, then I think we should do like, yeah. Another thing that this is related to this is that I propose to split up the CRI specific flags that we have currently, like network plugin equals CNI, CNI config directory, and CNI bin directory. These are all just for the Docker runtime and are useless for any other runtime. So I'm proposing to create one environment for environment file for this one kubelet container runtime.
Is Lucas breaking up for anyone else?
Yeah, Lucas, you're breaking. Lucas, Lucas, you're breaking up on us right now. Could folks turn off their videos temporarily?
Okay. Do you hear me still?
Yeah, much better actually.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm in a meeting room on Wi-Fi, so might not be the best here. Yeah, so I'll take it again. So one thing I guess we want to do at this time as well is to separate the CRI specific flags. So for example, everything that touches CNI that is specific to the Docker runtime isn't configurable via kubelet config. Again, as it's like just specific to this one runtime and isn't specific to kubelet, necessarily useful for the kubelet as a whole. So I propose we make one file like etc kubernetes kubelet cri.env or something that includes just one environment variable, which defaults to the CNI things needed for Docker. If you want to set or use any other runtime, we say like replace the contents in this file with your Docker or your CRI socket. And then I'm in favor of your, I first now understood what you mean, that we make this one yet another environment file that we could call like etc kubernetes kubeadm init env for the kubelet, whatever. And then we can set this dynamically.
So I think in general, I don't think we should have multiple environment files, but I do think having an environment file as a place for users to override defaults makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's what the original Kubernetes package that we produced eons ago did. Like the Jan, myself, Eric Paris, the original Kubernetes package is basically a ginormous env override that feeds into the actual unit file.
Yeah, that said, though, there are some limitations to the env file that I think we still need to allow users the ability to override via the drop-in as well.
So,
yeah,
but that should definitely be like super advanced use case and not.
But this little minutia is important because this is the contentious bit that we need to resolve. But I agree that we need an override, and it's good to see that like the initialization and join could potentially need to drop or modify that file.
So I think so. We already have the kubelet extraargs thing. So I mean, it's already technically possible to specify new custom args. I think having another file, like an environmental file we source this kubelet extra args parameter from, would be beneficial. And I also think three different files would be useful. One for user settings, one for kubeadm init time things we might have to do, and one for the container runtime specific bits.
I would suggest a bit different approach. Like the one which we have right now with kubeadm specific parameters. This we can generate by kubeadm init or join command. And when users will be able to add the bigger name of a file name, so drop in, which will override something what kubeadm generates.
Yes. So in general, if we provide like an env file, that should be owned by the user. So I don't know that kubeadm should be really modifying that env file at, join or init time. But there's no reason that we couldn't manage a drop-in that is then that the user overrides with either the env file or further systemd drop-in that takes precedence.
This is minutia of systemd-ish stuff. So,
but the biggest thing is that really the one thing that we don't have right now is a clear distinction between what is owned by what part of the process. And I think we really need to document that and start giving instructions to users on how to actually interact with the files that we're providing as well.
Okay, this we could rat hole on this piece. So like I think we're in agreement that we need to modify this, and I want to make sure that Lucas can go on to the other pieces. But I think we're in violent agreement, but the minutia needs to be hammered out. Does that seem fair to everyone?
I guess so.
All right. Did you want to continue on, Lucas? Because we haven't even gotten through a init.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I really want to. So, and I also want to point out with this discussion, like what environmental variables to override and etc. This really should be the last resort. I mean, eventually, I hope we have nearly everything configurable via the file that is versioned, and only have this like for small specific use cases like node IP that is instance specific and similar. But in general, I want us for the like 90% of the options, I want us to use version config, and hence the proposal. So at kubeadm, and for kubeadm embeds kublet's component configuration in its own API, and we enforce things like authorization for the kubelet and stuff. We then write the kubelet configuration down to disk to var lib kubelet config YAML. And this is what the kubelet then is going to read when it starts up.
So I have a question about that, Lucas. From what I've read, the initial config file, even when using dynamic config, is just read in at runtime and then, or read in at start time, and then it's written down into the directory. Then the config it pulls down is written down into the directory specified at the command line for the dynamic config. With that being the case, shouldn't the config file that we're writing down for either dynamic config or non-dynamic config is kind of that initial config, shouldn't that live somewhere under like etc Kubernetes instead of var lib kubelet, which I think we're reserving for things that the kubelet is managing itself?
So the reason for that, I guess, is that we do clear the directory when we do kubeadm reset. So to get everything into the clean state. And also, I mean, I don't have strong preferences on where to put it, but I think what is used by the kubelet at runtime is okay to have there. For example, we have that that config YAML file. We have a PKI directory there with the serving cert.
The PKI directory is created from the kubelet itself. We're initializing it with the PKI cert, with the certs from etc Kubernetes, and then the cert flow in the kubelet's actually dropping the ones in var lib kubelet. My biggest concern is end user, having an end user know where their configuration is coming from versus the static configuration versus the dynamic configuration. And this seems to blur the lines a little bit.
So I'm not proposing at all at this point in time to use dynamic configuration, but this is the first step towards that as an end goal, possibly. The dynamic configuration is basically, so if we see an update to the config map where the kubelet is referenced to in the cluster, it's gonna download it to the localIT1 directory, which I also think should be under var lib kubelet, for example, var lib kubelet dynamic config or whatever. And under that directory, it will store its local checkpoints. And if, for example, one config change is bad, it's going to roll back to the latest known good config or something like that. So if we want to co-locate them, we should either choose var lib kubelet or something etc. But I think the var lib kubelet should work.
I'm okay with var lib kubelet. I commented on your PR with regards to that's where it should pull to. So that makes perfect sense to me, at least when it's pulling down the local configuration from the cluster.
I mean, I agree with that for the dynamic kubelet config, but I don't agree with that necessarily for, the static kubelet config or for the initial config when running dynamic kubelet config.
It's not. It's the config that's loaded on the cluster, right? So this is. So if it's loaded from the cluster, it is a runtime variable. So var lib kubelet is an appropriate place, other than var run would be ephemeral. So it's a runtime parameter.
Right. So well, the dynamic kubelet config is but that's specified through like the dynamic config flag and not
So
the config
So
flag.
there's a minutia here.
Yeah.
yeah, I could, if I proceed, it might be clear. Because this kubelet YAML, or this config YAML, is going to be, when upgrading and when upgrading, it's going to be changed. So, I mean, we're basically emulating the dynamic kubelet config with this initial config. So now we've written down this config. We're uploading the init flow. We're uploading it to a config map, which is versioned per minor version. So we have, in this case, it would be called kubelet config 1.11. And then we create a RBAC rule that allows bootstrap tokens and all nodes in the cluster to read this config map.
So
if somebody has to modify the kubelet config after install, they would have to modify this file if they're not running the dynamic kubelet config to actually change the configuration on their kubelet.
Yes. So when you do join, it works as earlier, doing the discovery things. kubeadm, then kubeadm join will then grab the config map using the bootstrap token credential, put it into on disk in varlib kubelet, and now the kubelet can start up and do the TLS bootstrap and work normally. When we then have an upgrade, let's say we upgraded the server to 112, we got a new 112 config map, and we're upgrading our node. We're going to do the same thing, or that thing again. We run kubeadm upgrade config node or whatever node config, which will repull or redirect what configuration to use.
So
right. I'm thinking more of like a user running into an issue where they decide they need to tweak like the max pods for the kubelet on the host. They would have to modify this config file to override that setting.
Yeah, this gets to my point, which I was going to make, which is this assumes homogeneity across a fleet, which is not always the case. So like if you had multiple types of machine profiles, we get into a weird space here where like if you have multiple types of machine profiles, you would have potentially multiple configs, right? Where if you want to taint the nodes on initialization, or if you want to do things like max pod override across a subset of your fleet because the shape or the profile is different. Now, I'm not opposed to the current workflow, but I think we should absolutely mark it as like alpha because it assumes a bunch of things that in most production use cases are going to fall down, right?
So flags take preference over the config, and then I think for that advanced use case, would this kind of flow? So you do kubeadm upgrade. You're upgrading now to 112. You have the new 112 base configuration set in the cluster in a config map. And then when you do the update configuration step on the node before upgrading the kubelet there locally to 112, I think this could easily take an argument, config map name or whatever, that then if you have a specific machine profile for this node, you're just redirecting to another config map you own. So then you have like done whatever to your thing. And also this is, I mean, if you have a specific machine profile, you can then tweak it as you like and put it in another config map, which you reference for download.
Yeah, I think that's fine for the standard kind of init and join type of, or even an upgrade scenario, but that doesn't necessarily address the usability around modifying config out of band from a join or an upgrade. And I don't think we can just rely on just the command line args, because a lot of those are being deprecated and removed, and new configuration options are only being added in the config right now. So we need to take that into account at some point.
I'm okay with the default workflow, but I think what's missing from the document, and I have, you can't see it here, but I literally have chicken scratch all over a printout because I couldn't inline comment. But is that there's a bunch of places where we're going to need extra documentation to make it usable for a bunch of user stories and scenarios that that are common. And I wouldn't necessarily call them advanced. I call them much more common than we've kind of documented before, because people are using this in all kinds of different ways. So I just want to be clear that, like, for most of this, I'm not opposed to the workflow, I'm not opposed to the idea. And in fact, it cleans up the code from your PR in a couple of different ways that is actually beneficial. So I think there are some questions I do have with regards to upgrades that are not clean at all. I don't know, where do you want to, we talked a little bit about some of the details about init and join. Do you want to talk about upgrades in more detail?
Yeah, I could do so. But yeah, I mean, I definitely agree we should have a doc sprint or whatever at some point, after code freeze, that is, but some kind of holistic planning. Totally agree there. And identify, create a bunch of user stories. I'm basically doing this kind of thing in my notebook right now with regards to security profiles, trying to identify the different user stories for security we want to support in Kubernetes. And have that for a future version. Anyway, I mean, I think this also addresses the advanced use case. Otherwise, I don't understand what you mean. If the user can specify what config, or can tell Kubernetes pull down config or whatever we call it to do one specific config map I have for my...
Oh, no, I totally agree, but it's not documented in your thing, right?
So, no, yeah.
So I'm just saying, to document these use cases, right? The upgrade scenario is a little scary to me, because there's a bunch of people currently have, I'm going right into it. People currently have a bunch of unit file overrides, right? And or system drop-in overrides, right? That they've specified. And for this upgrade scenario, we need to have a very detailed outline view of the world of how they're going to transition to this configuration change, because some things will map into a config and some things won't. And
so one thing, Tim, is in general, we've been telling people to, there's been a lot of guidance to where people are just overriding the drop-in file that we're managing in the package. I think we're already breaking those users today on upgrade when they update the kubeadm package and it clobbers the drop-in file at that point.
So I think the most common recommendation, I might be wrong, but is to set 20 extrags or something drop in, right?
Yes.
And that is setting the kubelet extrags environment variable, which is not touched by kubeadm. So even though we do this whole upgrade, switch to the new thing, that is still going to work exactly as before.
Yeah, but the new unit file will have the default args, right? And then you're going to append, there might be conflict between will the configuration file override the default args, or will the default args override the configuration file? So if a person on the kubelet command line, if they have a 20, right, and the 20 appends, so people have to be very careful to make sure they append versus completely blast, right? And I guarantee you this is going to be a problem. People probably blasted versus appending.
So which environment variable are you talking about?
I'm talking about like a systemd drop-in file to basically add arguments or blast the arguments to the kubelet, right?
Yeah, we've been telling them to do kubelet extrags.
Yes, we tell them a lot of things, and it's clear from the inbound issues that they don't always read what we tell them. I'm just thinking the UX experience for this upgrade scenario needs to be super documented because it's going to be harsh.
Yeah, I mean, the fact is that this isn't. I mean, this might sound scary when I actually describe really detailedly what happens, but this is what have happened since Epoch. So it has been this scary every time, and we're trying to make it less scary over time. So the upgrade flow looks like, so right now what we have in our docs is you curl down a kubeadm standalone binary. You use that standalone binary to upgrade your API server. So we have one thing which is really annoying, and that is the apt-get upgrade on the master would pull both a new kubeadm binary and a new kubelet version. If we did that, the kubelet would be of a higher version, let's say 1.12, when our API server is 1.11. And hence, we can't start with apt-get upgrade. This is a troublesome thing, because I'm pretty confident that a lot of users do apt-get upgrade like all the time, or whatever, like without thinking about it. And I mean, nothing should happen, but in general, we don't allow nor E2E test our clients being of higher version than the API server itself. So that's why we really trying to not make that happen and always have the API server of higher version. So
I don't think that's even part of the API contract for a newer kubelet to contact an older API server.
No, but that is problematic because I guess people tend to do kubeadm or apt-get upgrade pretty frequently. So it's a fair chance that they're going to upgrade the kubelet before the API server.
I think we just need to be really, really explicit about the documentation for the upgrade process.
I think we have that bit at least okay. We're doing worse in other areas, so to say. But anyway, so we upgrade the but the problem is with the current approach, we can't do apt-get install kubeadm because that would grab the new drop-in file that is incompatible with the kubelet, with the old kubelet that we have. So hence we have to curl it down, upgrade, and then apt-get upgrade. But as with these changes, our drop-in file we ship inside of kubeadm is going to be more or less static between minor versions. So then we can do, as a first step, say, upgrade only the kubeadm deb package using apt-get install kubeadm and a specific version. Then you get the normal way, you get the new kubeadm binary. You can upgrade your API server, and then first we say, now you can upgrade your kubelets. So that is basically what's going to change or be improved. And yeah, on after upgrading your API server, when you should upgrade your nodes, it's like read the new config kind of command, and then you can do apt-get upgrade. First, you should ideally go to your master and execute kubelet drain and cordon, but I'm unsure if users actually do that because, yeah, I don't know. The problem is that it requires basically root privileges to the cluster to do it, cordon and drain. So we can't do it on the node side. Any comments?
So I'm torn. I'm gonna put my video back on, hopefully. I'm torn because I like it and I want it, and I wanted it a long time ago. And I'm torn because of the timing. I'm scared that it changes a lot. But our freeze process is well over a month. So I'm going to stop there and say, what do other people think? Because I want opinions from the broader group of how comfortable they feel and why, because it shouldn't just be me saying anything, right?
Nor me.
I'd like to hear from some other than myself as well.
Well, I'm none of you. I didn't actually realize how long we had for freeze. So it's like a month before the stable release goes out? Or how is it a month before the
Yes,
first
I think it's scheduled to come out late June, like the 26th or something. So we have well over a month to stabilize. And if people like do test continuously, both locally and have the E2E tests running, I don't think it should be a problem.
It would be a lot easier to feel, let me turn my video on too, let's see what happens. It'd be a lot easier to feel confident about this if I had more faith in our testing regimen. We missed some pretty big stuff the last round. And the testing plan is on everybody's to-do list, but it's not done yet or even really started. So like, we can talk about having a month to put this through its paces as much as we want, but I don't know that we know what its paces even are.
I kind of do. His doc pretty much spells out the details. There are corners. There's a lot of corners. In fact, it's like, it's all corners. It's a tetrahedron or some type of, but it's super highly useful in the long run. So I'm torn.
Well,
Personally,
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, personally, I'd really like to see this formalized into a cap where we could continue discussing things, especially around kind of where the minutia is, and really try to target this for the next cycle rather than trying to push it for 111 myself.
Why not 111?
Just because, if we do formalize this into a cap and actually go through some of the discussion and work through the different, points of minutia and working up various different test cases, I don't see how we can do that and still get something merged by the code freeze deadline.
I mean, my PR that I have basically implements all this.
Right,
already.
but if we're going to have discussions over exactly how we handle the package managed system to unit configuration and how we do the user overrides, everything like that, how, even building up a test plan, that's all going to take time and that's going to require changes to the PR that you have.
So what in the test plan is directly blocking getting this in, because I mean we have already our happy path test suits, and the times it has been proven to be broken, our tests have been failing.
Yeah, so other people, Alexander, please comment, Lee, Matt, other folks. I want their feedback.
Well, my current understanding is what our packaging is broken, and until we properly solve scenario what we publish packages properly for all most common distributions and packages to be built for those specific distributions, not like we currently generate them, and until we have like each repository for each major branch, I don't think we will have some good packaging solution.
So one thing I think we conflate at the moment is like we've said that we want better packaging from like the first KubeADM version, without defining exactly what better packaging is, and that's because better packaging is such a huge area and such a like thorny thing. So we're probably never gonna get that all corners perfectly fine. But I think this is an incremental improvement that does make make something a bit easier, and then it's gonna be easier to adapt for the platforms we might want to do things for in the future. Does that make sense to you?
Well, I understand it's incremental approach, but the current way of, for example, generating the packages from Bazel build, we cannot really produce the packages which will be compliant to standards for example, for Red Hat or CentOS. And even Debian packages, what we are producing, were not Debian fully compliant. So if do something, we need to do it good, even with small details.
Yeah. So I mean, this is related to packaging, but this isn't packaging. This is about changing one kubelet flag, like changing one kubelet flag to load from a file versus.
Well, I mean, let me explain a bit what I mean. Is if we want to support the distributions properly using the packages and proper packaging standard, then we need to obey all the paths which is standard for these distributions. So, for example, like in Debian, the environment variable file, it should be not an etc kubelet, but it should be stored in etc defaults something. So similarly for Red Hat and OpenSUSE, you should have it under etc sysconfig something. When each of these distributions, they have their own rules where the systemd files should be located. And when each of these distributions, we have like automatic packaging drop-ins for systemd. Like one require what, like installing systemd unit file, daemon should be reloaded, one should be not. So this matrix of supported distributions is huge.
And that's why, yeah, but that's why nobody has driven it either, more than like for the most common case. And I mean, I'm happy to do it if we find someone that is want to make our thing compliant to all things. But yeah, Lee.
Could we do something that's like really common in like RubyGem kind of packaging, where we include template config files with the source that we distribute in the package, and then expect the user to do the distributions and stuff like that. Since we're not at a place right now where our tooling allows us to support the matrix of operating systems that we're packaging for. So document it, just like how we keep saying, oh, the upgrade process needs to be documented. It needs to be documented. I mean, might as well just put the file in a uniform place for people and make sure that they know to install the unit file.
Jason, I think you were about to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think we need to target like full distribution compliance right now. I think there are certain steps that we can take that would get us closer. The biggest concern that I have right now is that we're talking about basically a relatively large change to the way that we're configuring the kubelet from how we are today. And to manage the complexity of that change where users have been just kind of like modifying a file that we lay down in the packaging, we need to make sure that we have a clear separation of concerns on what's configuring what. So I think there is some packaging related concerns that are coming along with this just out of that fact.
I'm volunteering for writing up such docs at least.
I think we should at least try to address those to get incremental improvement in the packaging that we're shipping now. And then we can worry about better distribution compliance at a later point.
Yeah, I agree with that as well as what Lee said. Like about, I mean, we have the drop-in file documented in our docs, and we're telling what it does, but not explicitly saying this is how you package your thing for your OS, which I guess you will mean.
I mean, I don't want to tangent too far from this systemd packaging issue, but I'm also curious to provide a voice for people who are maybe not using systemd to run the kubelet. For instance, like using containerd with LinuxKit or using a containerized kubelet on Docker. Like, what is the do we have an opinion on what the configuration expectation for the users in those cases? Since we're not just like providing them a unit file.
So I think in general, sorry, Alexander, you were saying something?
I was just wanting to say that it would be good if users from those system who doesn't use systemd would document it somewhere, like how we're currently using it. So when we can probably come up with some generic solution for that.
So I know I've been messing around with LinuxKit recently myself, and I've hacked up kind of a solution there. I'm more than happy to contribute that as part of the docs to demonstrate how it could be done in that environment.
Yeah, I guess just like the point is like with the growing number of configuration topologies that people are running the kubelet on, it seems like even just the documentation for systemd, it's like the 99% use case maybe that it's not for us.
Yeah, I'm happy. So again, we have something like we have bits of all these things spread out in our docs under like some things under implementation details, something is under a reference, something is under kubeadm init, and something is like in the getting started guide. We have many of those bits we've discussed now, actually documented, but the problem, as we've also said with Tim, is like discoverability. So actually seeing those typical uses and writing dedicated pages on this is how you do X, this is how you do Y, is probably one of the good improvements we could as well do for 1.11. But that requires, again, dedicated effort by a group of people, not like that have different areas of expertise to actually write things down.
So here's my feeling, right? Like my gut says I'm totally fine with having this as a optional feature, but having it be the default requires that it's not just a commitment upon your or my part, it's a commitment upon the part of this SIG to make sure that this doesn't suck. Because like we've gone through a number of releases where the .0 is basically broken to the point where we've gone to a .3 release or so before we've actually had all the bugs and kinks worked out, right? And we recommended it to other people. So are folks able and committed, besides just Lucas, because you said you have the month or so or before you have to go back, to provide the testing cycles and the documentation cycles that we're going to need to make this a success? Because it is a huge change. I understand that. And it's a change in functionality and behavior. But it provides a set of capabilities in the long run that we've always wanted, because it gets us out of the business of eating it on every upgrade, right?
I can commit to helping out with this. I guess the immediate question that I think of is, what is the sad path experience for a user, like in the event that this configuration goes wrong, right? So, and what are the possible escape hatches and fail safes that we can put into things like Kubedium and init that catch these issues beforehand, optimistically? That's like the kind of questions that you should be asking in regards to the attitude that you're trying to bring out. But yeah, I mean, like, are other people on board to help push this change through where it doesn't break, you know, in a bunch of weeks?
No matter what it is, I'm fully on board to try to make 1.11.0 as successful as possible, because I don't want to be in the business of fast churning patch releases.
I'm also gonna make a lot of effort to make it as successful as possible, and yeah, it's obvious that for me, I think we can make that happen with this thing as well. I don't think it's even possible to do this as an alpha feature, really. I mean, or otherwise
I think it is. I think you could have a drop-in file that basically is a commented out section that says, for a person to opt in, uncomment this block, right? And a person could just do feature gate, blah, blah, blah. And that would do the override for initialization. But the code paths are much cleaner with the current configuration inside of Kubedium with your PR.
I mean, I'll just say I'm a little gun shy because I've spent the majority of this cycle fighting upgrade issues.
Well, we've reached time. Does it? Do folks want to take this to the mailing list, and we can chime in there about who can actually commit to making this happen and make a call from there?
Oh, we flip a coin.
Yeah, I guess we have to do so. Bye.
Thanks, folks.